I did a lot of the exercises in the book, which was super helpful. I would say the book kind of carries you along in that for each point it wants to make, it doesn't just explain it. It also encourages you to think about how it applies to your life. So I did a few of the exercises, and I ended up like making serious changes, or at least seriously reconsidering a lot of the things that I was doing based on pretty much the entire thing. Like to some extent, I was like, this resonates with me in some way. But I would say, if you could only read one chapter
Yeah,
or something like that, which is a little bit sort of separate, I would say the YOLO action chapter is really good. And that's just because, a lot of times I can imagine people get stuck in thinking about these things, but never really practicing it. But there's a lot of focus in that chapter about making something happen. And like the idea is that you're not supposed to necessarily focus on the perfect plan and doing it eventually, but it's doing something like in the present moment and having this raw feeling in your head of joy and creativity and focus that allows you to transition from a passive state to an action state, an inspired action, or commit inspired actions, as you put it. And I would say that's really critical. So for me, I think if I were to recommend one chapter for everyone, I would say you'd probably get the most sort of efficacy from the YOLO action chapter. I would say a summary of the book is that it's basically like the opposite of quitting, right? So if you feel like
don't quit or YOLO. Either quit or YOLO, your choice.
Exactly. Just if you think about it, so you I think the sort of standard narrative for adulthood is that you like accept some level of like unsatisfaction in your life, and it's normal because you're resource constrained and your body is deteriorating and you're like laden with all these responsibilities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so the mature thing to do is just kind of settle down. And that's why they, call it settling. It's not just settling in the sense of like putting yourself in a like defined, predictable position, but it's also settling as in not necessarily going for what you want. And in the process of settling, you end up stopping or quitting on a lot of the goals that you have, and just sort of thinking of yourself as like a restrained version of something really magnificent that you might have fantasized about. And the YOLO book is basically the exact opposite attitude, which says, look, you're not going to get the opportunity to do those things unless you actually commit to them and make them happen. And there's no reason for you to live a quiet life of desperation for a long period of time in a settled space. What you want to do is basically make the things that you want to have happen. And so if you feel like in whatever part of your life you've quit too much, like I would totally recommend this book. I think it's not particularly long, and so you're not like devoting a ridiculous amount of time to looking at sort of methodology that you might not be able to apply to your life. It's something that should speak to you at your core. And I would bet that if you have an inner child that isn't being satisfied, it definitely will speak to your core.